Well, today's dedicated to what all good fishermen do, which is trying to get out of my comfort zone. I'm fishing waters I've never fished before, and a time of day that I usually don't go out. I'm trying a bunch of different approaches. Even the wind today is gonna really give me a run for my money. But even if it is going to be a frustrating day, maybe a day that I get skunked, hope to at least learn something out of getting out of my comfort zone, something I'd recommend for all fishermen. Not skunked. Nice little bow. Well, good to know I'm not going to go home skunked. That little bow is caught on green floating crankbait with a treble hook. If you do use treble hooks or any kind of hook for a trout, make sure that the hooks are barbless. Limit any damage you do to the trout. Really fragile species, but nice aggressive little rainbow trout. And no, I am not just using my lures. I'd be a terrible fisherman if all I did was use spinners. Spinners are very versatile, but no, today's a day for experimenting, and so I'm trying a variety of approaches, from some little spoons to floating some worms down, which is something that I got to get better at on a casting rod. So yeah, I encourage you to get out of your comfort zone every once in a while, do some experimenting, but sure glad I'm not going home skunked. And while on the subject of ethical fishing, when you're fishing for trout, you always want to make sure that they stay in the water as long as possible. That last rainbow I caught, I would have loved to have gotten a picture of it so you could see the color along its side, but I had kept it in the net long enough and didn't want to stress the fish out any more than necessary. You also want to make sure that whenever you're handling a fish, to make sure your hand is wet. They have a mucousy film along their body. It helps them fight off infections and diseases, and so if you touch a trout with dry hands, it can rub off that protective film along their bodies. I've seen a lot of fish dead on the shore and they have white spots all over their bodies. That's from fishermen touching them with dry hands, and the film gets rubbed off and they get infections. You also want to make sure that when fishing for trout, use a net like this. It has a rubbery webbing, not knotted webbing. That can also damage their skin and take off that protective layer of mucus along their bodies. Yeah, and hey, if you didn't know that you shouldn't touch a trout with dry hands, or that you should crimp the barbs on your hooks, don't beat yourself up about it. I mean, when I moved to Idaho from Texas and made that transition from a bass angler to a trout angler, I had a lot to learn. Bass are such a hardy fish. You could horse them up to your boat, grab them by the lip, wave them over your head, and yell, "Looky what I caught." Trout, you just can't do that. And so, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, but the more I learned, the more I adjusted how I fished, and the more appropriate gear and equipment I bought to make sure that I was taking care of the fish that I was catching. So I caught a few small rainbows, one underneath those trees right there, and then one in this pool over here to my left. But too small to know the difference between food and a lure, so I don't feel like a particularly keen fisherman right now. And I've stayed in this spot way too long. It's one of those spots that's just so fishable, you feel like you should be knocking them dead. But I've been here way too long, casted many different combinations of lures, and all I got to show for it is a couple small fry. It's windy to be casting upstream, but I'm gonna give it a shot. Time to get wet. Another nice sized bow. Beautiful. Well, folks, a couple of takeaways. Green, yellow, and orange were the colors of the day. every single lure I used that caught fish. Green, yellow, and orange. And I need to get a lot better at floating worms. I only used one of my lures once. I know I said I wasn't gonna do it, but I did it. Didn't catch anything. So went back to throwing some crankbaits and some spoons. Green, yellow, and orange. So someone asked me recently why I don't fly fish, why I don't use a fly rod. I always use a spinning rod. You know, and here in Idaho, there's some rivers that are fly fish only. When I first moved here from Texas, you know, I probably would have said it's because fly fishermen are a bunch of rich, stuck-up snobs. And that was just stupid of me. That was just dumb of me, dumb bass fisherman from Texas. Now that I've lived here in Idaho for 8 years, I've met a lot of fly fishermen. And they're good sportsmen, and they care about their craft, they care about the water and the fish. Ernest Hemingway, he'd fish these waters and he only used a fly rod, so there's something to be said about fly fishing. Now, I guess it just costs more money. It'd be like picking up a second hobby. I have to get a fly rod and some flies, and I already spend enough money on the tackle, the line that I use already. So I guess if someone wants to donate a fly rod and some flies, yeah, I'll give it a shot. If it's good enough for Ernest Hemingway, it's good enough for me. There's lucky number 3. All right, big guy. I'll let you go. Well, today was a nice day. 3 nice sized trout, all pushing 12 inches. A great day courtesy of Public Lands. Thank you, BLM. Keep it public.